Okay, that's good. I still don't, but I'm glad you do, which means you can probably hear me too. My videos on my end while trying to watch my stream on my phone just to verify that it's working. I don't see me. I'm still showing this last live just now. I mean, if you can see me though, I think we'll just run with that. At some point this will catch up to itself because the mobile's always behind. Okay, now it updated and it says it's streaming retro. And now I'm seeing live. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's definitely a connection thing. That error 2000 means, somewhere in between me and you, something went, apparently. I think you said it was error 2000, yeah? Anyway. Alright, so that seems to have rectified itself for the moment. And it's gonna be 2 VODs probably again. But that's okay. All I did was walk a few steps up. Because when I saw it go red and reconnect, and it's like, oh, hold still. Okay, so there's no one in the shop. Sure. Ooh. Chainmail and wood hats. Well, let's check the chart. Let's check the chart. Yeah, I need to get rid of these dialogues that say everything reconnected, because they're probably... Okay. Chainmail. Right now we have leather armor, right? Chainmail's plus 18, and leather armor is plus 12, so if we do the chainmail, that's a huge step up too, and we have the money for it. Who can equip it? Chainmail, 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 H-R-A-C-T. So A is Elena, C is Crisco, and, Bray can't. I think they would be happy and loving creatures. I think they might be a mess to clean up after. But it depends on your philosophy on slimes. Like, if it's this type of slime that leaves an ooze trail behind it, like a slug would per se, you could make the argument that that would be a biological necessity. They would need a very humid water-like environment, so they obviously couldn't be in deserts. If you're saying that they would need, if they're somehow self-surfacing, so if you touch them, like to pet them, that you don't come back with a handful of goo, that they have an actual sort of skin to them, or a membrane, probably a membrane, let's say, which would logically make more sense for a creature that size to maintain that shape, that they have some sort of internal structure or a membrane to them with an internal structure, then you wouldn't have to worry about that happening. In the representations we see in Dragon Quest, especially in the later DS games and in the movie, and some people don't consider the movie canon, they are that sort of membranous material to where if a slime bops you, you don't come back full of goo. They just sit on you. That's their attack, they sit on you. And certainly with metalies, because that's an entirely different breed of slime. But now we have to have the discussion about metally slimes, metal babbles, and metal wyverns, which we saw in the last game. So that kind of throws off the dynamic and would need some thinking too. If you classify metalies as their own species that just happen to have the shape of a slime and a babble and a wyvern or a chimera, versus if you have a slime family, but then the canon's kind of messed up with slime family too, because manowars are considered sea creatures, not slimes, even though there's a clear correlation to Heelys and cure slimes. So now are we talking about a direct evolution where a slime became a healer and then became a curer, and then one of those two became an ocean-dwelling creature? Or are we talking about convergent evolution where we see two different species make the same adaptation to the same environment? So it's entirely possible that the sea slimes, the manowars, not sea slimes, Man-O-Wars, it's entirely possible that Man-O-Wars aren't a member of the sea slime family in a species-like way. They're not directly correlated, they just have very similar adaptations to their environment, so they look virtually identical. That could explain why they're actually considered separate families in with sea creatures as opposed to in the slime family. If we're talking in those terms. And then it depends, I mean, obviously a lot of it has to do with headcanon. Because like I've been saying for the last few streams, hero worship isn't good. Idolization isn't good. Like if we took the guy who designed the slime family and then the guy who categorized all the monsters in the later games, had them sit down and talk, they'd probably disagree with each other. So there can't be a formal canon. And I think that kind of exists with a lot of works, and that's good. Because if you look at a game like Fran Bow, where if you really sit back and think hard about it, like, there are answers that can be found. But there's also a lot, even by the author of that game had stated, I left it up to interpretation. I think that they left too many clues and there is a definitive answer, but that's okay, because that's my interpretation of the game. I personally think that sea slimes are not sea creatures, but evolved from regular slimes. The membranous thing makes perfect sense, especially if you have something that levitates, like a heel slime. If it was goopy, then it would run down its own yellow legs, but it doesn't. Pure slimes also don't have this problem. Sea slimes especially don't have this problem. If you look at a sea slime, it would need a membranous outer coating to not have osmosis occur and ultimately dissolve the slime. So the membranous thing in a grand scheme makes sense. The idea of them evolving from the same, I can't say either way. I like to think they did. But I also don't have any sort of genetic database for a fictional creature from a fictional game to be able to establish that creature A is in fact evolved from creature B. We could take that a step farther and say that the dragons, the green dragon and the blue dragon, even though one's a boy and one's a girl, they might not be the same species. They look the same, but it could be a convergent evolution where they just come up with the same adaptations to their environment. It's a lengthier and less likely explanation, but it's possible. So we're looking at the taxonomy of these creatures. Is it taxonomy? I think that's the right word. If we're looking at the taxonomy of these creatures, we really only have so much data to go on. But it's fun. It's worthwhile. It's fun to have these discussions and think about these things. It makes it because you have so many games and so much lore and so many different creatures and all this other fun stuff to, like, you know, are the ghosts from Dragon Quest 1 related to the ghosts for Dragon Quest, I don't know, 3? Just picking a number. Like, are they the same species of ghost? Are they similar ghosts? Do they come up under the same circumstance? Are ghosts their own creatures? A ghost, specter, and poltergeist? Are they their own species of creature? Or are they some sort of revived magician? You know, like, all these things. Well, it's very interesting to think about, because there's so much to think about if you really want to deep dive into it. Chainmail. We gotta check the wood hats, too. Oh, definitely, because it opens the discussion to bigger things. It's like we can talk about taxonomy and evolution, environmental factors, and that's an education sort of thing, too, because now when we start talking about how their environment affects them, we're ultimately talking about how environmental change could also affect them. Like, kind of like how climate change is slowly cooking the earth, and like how we have very little snow here compared to when I was a kid, and then my parents knew more snow than they knew when they were adults, and how that's a corollary that the planet's quickly getting warmer. Like, it's not going to kill the planet. It'll probably cause a mass extinction and probably wipe us out, but what can you do? Snakes, eels, and fish, yeah. Because don't snakes, I want to say, am I wrong? That snakes have, or maybe I'm thinking of something else. that snakes are, like, they have little hip bones, like they used to have legs, or am I thinking of another creature? I want to say it was... I could be wrong. I could be wrong. And then you have legless lizards, which is its own whole thing. But watching all these creatures adapt to their environment is just... it's just magical stuff if you go and trace through all of it. Let's see. We're buying... Chainmail, we already gave one to Elena. We need to give one to Chris, right? Yeah, I know. It's terrible. It's like, sorry, pal. Gotta dissect you. Then we gotta compare your bones to the bones of something we found 2 million years ago in the rock face. Oh, with slimes, yeah, it'd totally be easy. But then we have to look into the archaeology of the plate tectonics and all that, and all the other fun stuff to look up where the slimes originally came from. Because we know a cat's a cat, but we don't know what a cat was before it was a cat. Before it was taxonomically distinct, or I think is maybe I'm guessing at the right words here. So we would need to look in the archaeological record to find what evidence of what cats may have evolved from or be, and then farther back to where did that predator creature come from. And then, interesting enough to me, that all mammals come back to a small mouse-like creature with razor-sharp teeth, like a mouse with a possum smile. Like, that's where mammals came from. Like, that's awesome. Like, we all evolved from mice, I like to think. I like to say in my headcanon, like, oh, so we all evolved from cute little mice with really sharp teeth. Although obviously they weren't mice, they weren't rodents, it's not, you know... Great-grandfather, and then you do the scientific notation. Great-grandfather, and then, like, what is it, up 10, or how do you do that? It's 10 up, and then scientific notation is, yeah, it's 10, and then the little number above it is how many zeros. So it's 10 up, like 99999. But it's also fascinating to think that, like, and this is something I was thinking of, that occurred, well, it didn't occur to me. It was something that, someone pointed out somewhere in one of the videos I watched on YouTube, is that you go back to, like, X amount of great-grandfather, like, that's not a human. If you go to X amount more of great-grandfather, like, that was a fish. And it's like, this isn't a long period of time. Like, you might think about millions of years as a long time, but when you break it down into the generations of the creatures that lived it, it makes it a lot shorter. And that's crazy. So it's like X amount of generations back, like, our species didn't exist and we were a previous hominus, and then before X generations before that, and they were comparatively small numbers, because you're grouping your numbers into generations as opposed to actual years. So a bracket of years is, say, 20 years, and that actually is a divisor into the numbers when you're looking back at the evolutionary record of humans, which is wildly fascinating. Like, oh, this many generations back, you weren't even human. This many generations back, you know, you were this. And then this many generations back, you were, like, you know... And it was a really cool thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a fascinating thing from my head brain to think about just now. Because it was really cool. They did it with, like, a video graphic, and, like, they showed the little slices of, like, how many generations back. Like, let's go back this many generations. But... we're trying to play a video game, I think. I love going off on tangents, though. So thank you very, very much for that. Okay. He cannot equip the chainmail, so we're not going to buy it for him. Yes. We have to go in here, and then switch to this. +3. No shield. We have a feather hat. Now, we go to equip. We go to Christo, then we go to Boomerang, Chainmail, Leather Shield, Leather Hat. And I really feel like that menu style, which you're right, may also be in 2 and 1. I did not play the NES version recently, so it's entirely possible it's just as archaic. I was watching someone streamed the very first version of Wizardry from 1981 last night. It was incredible watching the way the menu system is set up, and it's 1,000,000% easy to see how this concept of a menu system is an evolutionary step in programming from the wizardry menu system. And then, of course, we get into how much the Dragon Quest games are really just an homage to wizardry. It's fascinating stuff. Yeah, it was. I do believe it was the version for the Apple II. Like, it had no music. It had no music. It had very few sound. I don't think it had sounds actually. It was all menu based, and your screen for your view screen of like say right now, like we're looking at the video game on toward the left. The video game screen for like the dungeon was like a tiny corner of the upper left hand screen, and the sprites were like 3-color sprites. So it was a really amazing stream to watch. And I don't think he's streaming tonight, so I don't think I'll get to see it, which is a bummer, because it's interesting to me as someone who enjoys video games to think about, you know, the style of game that Fran Bow is, and how great a game that is, how beautifully told it is, how the graphics have such a specific style, and there's puzzles and all that other fun stuff. And then to also say, look at this game called Wizardry from 1981 or whatever it was, like this also is a beautiful thing. And it's like, I think between those two things we are making an argument, like, yeah, it's a computer game and it's coding, but at a certain point it does become art. We're talking about, you know, two different artistic representations of code that create a sense of enjoyment and fulfillment, hopefully, for the intended end user. So that is the same as someone who takes a canvas, takes paint, applies it to the canvas in a certain way, and then someone is fulfilled or has a sense of enjoyment or passion or pain, or it evokes an emotion in them. So I think that is your direct correlation for how you can argue that games are in fact art and do deserve preservation. And the idea that, like, licensing and copyright and can't play in this region or emulators are bad and all those arguments are like, you're fundamentally saying that people aren't allowed to have canvases and paint because you own that color of paint, which is another interesting argument in the art community. There's something called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's the darkest color of paint ever created. But it's not a paint in the intrinsic sense, it's almost an epoxy enamel that actually has to be baked at like a couple of 100 degrees, but it absorbs 99.9% of all light and turns it into heat. That paint is owned. Someone, because it's a chemical more than it is a paint, someone actually owns that paint, and they do not let anyone other than themselves have access to it. I'm not sure how I feel about that. And then you have, I think it's Black 2.0 comes the next closest, that you can paint something and it reflects 99.97 reflective light, but it's not as dark as, I think it's Venta Black, Venta Black, something like that. I don't think that you should be able to own a material. It'd be like if someone copyrighted silk and said, I'm the only person on the planet that's allowed to sell silk. It's the same thing why diamond mines are unethical. It's the same thing why emerald mines are unethical. It's like, you can't say that you own an entire, like, you might own the land, and that's cool and all, but you can't copyright diamonds, dickhead. Like, and the whole structure that's built around mining, and gemstone mining in particular, and how evil it is, like, oh yeah, it was super cool too. Like, this guy had the original box, and not the re-release gold box he was saying. He said it was a particular original black box with a red font. And I don't know, that doesn't mean anything to me, but he was using those as markers of the fact that this is the original Wizardry game. And there was like 6 manuals it came with, and they were thick, like little tiny phone books, like directories. It's like that's what all this stuff does. And he still also had his tablet open for all the information he needs for the game. And I was asking about it. So wait, when you're casting a spell and you misspell the spell, like you say Halita instead of Halita,